Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shub, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. So, Patrick, this time it's just you and me, man. No one else to direct all my rants and frustrations at.
Sorry, I know you like your Friday afternoons differently.
Only those afternoons with no work at all.
I know, and I know that talking to me is like work for you. So
Oh man, I
sorry.
mean, couldn't be better. Nice,
Okay.
nice. I guess
Well, but I do.
now that we've established that clearly we've had better things going on, I guess in the week and in life in general. What are some of the exciting things that I guess you've been looking at last week? Some themes that you're excited about right now.
So one portfolio founder team of ours that we like quite a lot just signed a massive Series A. They're in the space of cross-border manufacturing for construction. So
Nice.
that's a topic I brought today. Maybe we can talk about that. That's not that company, but that space overall, because there's actually
Yeah.
really cool companies popping up in LATAM. Of course, Asia is I think the originator of the theme, and Europe. So that's one thing that I found interesting. And another one, I'm completely enraged with some random claims that random VCs sometimes make on
Yeah.
social media. And there's a pattern there that I wanted to discuss with you.
I mean, both sound very interesting topics. The two for entirely different reasons, obviously, but also very interesting topics. I have to say, I think I wouldn't consider myself the smartest person, nor would I consider to be in full transparency. Most VCs to be the smartest people out there. Although quite a few, of them are, I would say smart, but not maybe as smart as people believe the outside world believes us to be.
Yep.
Um, but this week I learned something that I must admit I had no idea about before this week began about this concept of surety bonds. As I learned from you, Patrick, it is actually quite the norm, quite the market standard in so many parts of the world, in the mature markets. So very excited about what I learned and how that could be applied in many emerging markets, India and possibly elsewhere as well. Um, yeah, that for me was like a very interesting highlight. I guess if I zoom a bit further out, when I look at what's happening in the outside world, sometimes I wonder. There's this popular expression, as of course we are familiar with, called the old age wisdom goes, "Don't try to catch a falling knife." Sometimes when I
Hmm.
zoom out and look at the news out there, I really wonder like how far has the knife been falling, right? How much of a drop has happened, and today when we look at this, a lot of us are scared, alarmed at just how deep the valuation cuts go. I wonder if this is just the first round of a cut that is bound to get much deeper and much more painful.
I think we'll have fun discussing that because there's two theses that sometimes friends and other funds think are competing with each other, but I actually think they're completely overlapping. Some
Hmm.
people, like myself, say that the data points that there's already a new 10-year venture cycle kicked off, that
Hmm.
kicked off late last year. And I have a few numbers that I can share with you that I think support that.
Okay.
And at the same
Yeah.
time, I'm also saying that the first round of cuts only happened on the existing firms, and there's more fun to come. And I think
Nice.
both things actually coexist right now. So let's discuss that for sure.
All right. I guess that's quite a few things to talk about.
Awesome.
Any preferences? What do you want to start off with?
What the hell are surety bonds?
All right. I mean, had you asked me this a few days ago, I would ask you the question back. So what I've gathered, right? I would be like, what is surety bond, right? By the way, on an entirely different note, there's this very funny thing around a play on surety bond and James Bond. I guess
Mm.
for those of you who follow that, go chase that one, I suppose. But but staying on theme. So think of a surety bond as like an insurance product or like a insurance-backed guarantee that, say, a contractor or a supplier who's supplying to a large high-value project, say for an infrastructure or a very large building project, which the end owner, for which the end user, obviously, it's very important to them that the stuff gets delivered on time, built on time, commissioned on time, etc. They want some sort of assurance from the service provider or the material provider that, hey, this stuff will actually get delivered, and there's some sort of repercussion, either a repercussion if it doesn't happen, or the end user still has a recourse to make themselves whole through financial
Right.
means or otherwise.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing, I think, to you, obviously, as I learned very recently, you were like, okay, there are obviously lots of mechanisms to solve this. What I always heard of in markets like India, in Africa, for example, the way businesses, and I'm talking about large businesses on the infrastructure side, the way they get around to solving, if it can be called solving this problem, is by seeking what are called bank guarantees. In some other markets, they could be called letters of credit or equivalent. I
Hmm.
think the
Right.
specific term changes in different jurisdictions. But in essence, it's sort of like it places a hold on the assets you have in the bank, which then allows you to sort of offer a guarantee that, hey, if this goes bad, if that goes bad, you can sort of trigger a claim through a banking process, for financial compensation. But as you can imagine, this also means those assets are sort of frozen directly or indirectly and not truly accessible by you. So it's a method of protection that really constrains you as a business if that's what you're signing up for. And
And
I
by the
thought,
way,
hey, wow.
that's double ironic that the banker who has a permission from the government and the central bank to use fractional reserve banking, meaning they can lend out more than they have to keep in bank, that they make you keep it in bank. So, I mean, there's an irony there.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. Exactly. Exactly. Right. All this talk of liquidity, etc., and here you go with this almost sounds medieval. That, hey, if you need to do X, you need to have X in reserve, and you can't really have any levering to that.
Yeah.
And I thought, and in my limited sphere of knowledge, I thought, okay, this is how business gets done in large, complex infrastructure projects. And at least my mind was, to be honest, blown by the concept that, hey, we don't need to do it this way, right? You can just have a more sophisticated insurance product where, through various means, and we probably won't be able to get into the details of how, but maybe you can better assess the risk of the parties involved and underwrite it into like a quote unquote insurance product, which would be called a surety bond, so that all the parties are protected if something doesn't go according to plan, while not constraining the contractor or the material supplier in fulfilling. I think it's a need which should have been done decades ago, but I'm glad that in some markets it is, for in India, for example, is finally kicking in, and very excited to see what more happens in this space. I think it could be a game changer that unlocks more productivity, even more rapid growth for businesses that have had to rely on traditional capital access.
I'll throw in some shameless plugging here because that's why a global view for
Hmm.
construction tech and AEC tech makes so much sense. Surety bonds were signed into law in the American economy in 1935. That was
Oh,
basically
wow.
post, yeah, almost 100 years ago. That was basically post the, Black Friday, 1929, gold standard, all that stuff that happened in the early 30s. It was signed into law back then. Why? Because it's a pretty great tool to allow the economy and the contractors that are under business stress, but also the real estate owners and developers that needed to find ways to be certain that these contractors that were under stress could actually deliver on the products, on the projects, to stimulate that business from flourishing again. So now, 100 years later, there is still economies on this planet within the construction sector that have not used that product. Shub, when did India actually legalize surety bonds? You told me this the other day.
Yeah, I mean, I still have to recall when I hear 1935 for the US. The
Yeah.
corresponding year for India is 2022. That is just
Yeah.
more or less 12 months ago. That's how
So
new and
now,
groundbreaking this is.
and that's such an amazing opportunity, right? Is when you have an established product, you know how it works from one market, and it's the default. Like when you're a realist, people need to understand this. People not from the US need to understand this. When in the US you're a real estate developer, you're not doing a project without a contractor that can provide the surety bond. You're just not doing it, right? So that's how
Yeah.
default this is. Now you're having an economy as big as India. India is by now the fourth largest economy in the world.
So the fifth today, um,
Yeah.
depending on what you project as growth rates, in India, we believe we could get to the third largest either by 2028 or 2030. Let's say conservatively
Yeah.
2030. Yeah.
Yeah. So overtaking Germany from the fourth and Japan from the third. So we're
Hmm.
talking like a top three economy in 2028 just defined that surety bonds for construction are a thing. So, any interesting startups and opportunities in that space? I mean, the timing is pretty great.
Yeah. So I think we've come across a couple, and I must say one in our mind at least stands quite a bit superior to the other that we've seen. Very interested to dig into that one, I have to admit. And I think unique take on the opportunity, unique take on the timing, how they can wedge themselves into the ecosystem in a very effective way to drive adoption. I must say I'm really quite excited to see how the space and this company plays out, and how even at a macro level, how this could sort of turbocharge infrastructure development, because I think
Right.
it's been so capital constrained for so long.
And I mean, India is such an important market that and stimulating also infrastructure development in India a lot. I don't know the numbers. Should maybe you know them, maybe you don't, but I want to look this up. I think the amount of infrastructure projects that the Indian government through the different states and municipalities is doing over the next 10 years is like mind-boggling. This is
Yeah,
next level to China, I would say.
yeah. I mean, I wish I knew had the exact numbers readily available, but I think if we take a 10-year horizon, that number will probably be in the trillions
Yeah,
of
an
dollars.
exciting market.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this. So we discussed it this morning, so it doesn't come completely as a surprise. But for me, insurtech, um, originally coming from B2C in most of the
Hmm.
markets, maybe first insurtechs popped up, or the first big funding rounds, I should say, in insurtech popped up 12, 11 years ago, around 2011, 12 maybe, was like
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
mostly B2C. Why B2C? Well, because you can really fix distribution
Hmm.
of insurance with technology. So, basically either abandoning the broker model or enhancing the broker model that originally was the
Hmm.
way to distribute. And legacy insurance companies, incumbents, pretty great at handling statistics, but not pretty great at handling customer experience. So that was a
Yeah.
real opportunity. When you moved into B2B, the promise always is, yeah, but it's not just a new distribution play. How defensible is that? No, no, no. We're actually underwriting the risk better.
Hmm.
Is that a thing in surety bonds?
So you want me to tell you the academic explanation or what I believe?
I'm about, money.
The real money. I think we're right now, and obviously my comment is more specific to markets like India, where surety bonds are novel,
Right.
not
Yeah.
really applies to markets like the US. I think we are now in a window of opportunity where, because the concept is so new, but people or the ecosystem generally believes it's a need which will gain rapid adoption. Everyone wants to dig in, but no one is confident about their ability to execute and rapidly gain market share.
I see.
Right? So all the market participants are sort of feeling and hedging themselves with a few approaches. on what will allow them very effective penetration and effective risk management and underwriting.
Hmm.
I don't think any party can confidently say, hey, you know what, we have nailed this as a way of managing the risk or underwriting. They have hypothesis, and therefore the extent of power, the extent of confidence, the extent of risk, and consequently the extent of money to be made is shared actually in quite an interesting way, where none of the parties can say, hey, one is significantly more powerful than the other, which is a unique window of opportunity we find ourselves in. I suspect we'll probably stay in this window of opportunity for 2 to 3 years at the outer limit, I believe, at which point some of the dust will settle and it will become clear who is in a better position, where they've actually figured out how to do the underwriting for these products, and therefore may not need support or certain layers of the offering being offered by other parties, and that is when perhaps someone can start to creep into the scope of other parties and take a more dominant presence in the space. I'm
So that
very
also means
Go
so that
ahead.
also means that if you're starting a surety bond insurtech,
Hmm.
the incumbents in India right now might actually not have better data and better statistics to crunch than you. You might actually be the first one that is seriously offering a statistics based underwriting of surety bonds. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Because, see, unlike other insurance products, so most, and obviously this is like a very simplistic explanation, what a surety bond essentially tries to measure and ensure is the contractor's willingness and ability to stay solvent and deliver the performed project. So
Right.
and also the ability to deliver on the required quality, which is different from only measuring the solvency of the business or only measuring the likelihood that a bad natural disaster or some other event takes out a physical asset that the company owns. It is also different from insurance that the business may take out for specific individuals, directors, for example, of the company. So now I will not deny that each of these individual aspects of underwriting the business do feed into underwriting a surety bond. Yes, for sure. I accept that. But the way these pieces come together to underwriting a surety bond, I'm not saying it's rocket science, but does anyone have enough data to confidently say, hey, you know what? Now we have tested all this at scale in the real world, and this is what the final product is. No, I think that point has not come yet.
Okay. Exciting
Yeah,
opportunity.
yeah, quite excited to see how this shakes out.
Nice. And as it relates to this, I remember Adam, our partner, and I were looking at a Brazilian firm. It's probably 2 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
that were looking to underwrite the material purchasing
Mm-hmm.
between the supplier being an OEM of construction materials, could be adhesives, could be bricks, could be cement, and
Mm-hmm.
net new customers. Because what this team was after was that, again, this Brazilian context, was
Mm-hmm.
that OEMs would not very routinely sell to net new customers, for example, in a different part of the country where they don't have a strong footprint or the customer they have not done any business with. So what this
Okay.
company injected themselves was basically saying, hey, I'm vetting the different contractors or retailers and their solvency once. I'm visiting them, I'm shaking hands, I'm looking at the books, and then I'm including them in my club. That's not the term that they used. Yeah, that's not the term that they use. That's the term that I use. Basically, hey,
Mm-hmm.
welcome to the club. You're now vetted. Now you can procure from our OEMs. At this point, you're like, I mean, I can procure from anyone. You actually
Yeah.
cannot. Because if you're not underwritten, they will not necessarily sell to you because they don't know if you're trustworthy. So, what the
Yeah.
company then injects into that transaction, aside from the vetting, is that they say, hey, dear OEM, sell to our vetted customers in every part of the country, and
Mm-hmm.
we will guarantee that they pay. And we're comfortable guaranteeing that they pay because we vetted them.
Okay.
And if they don't pay, I mean, I don't know the loss ratios on those. I'm assuming it's
Yeah.
less than 2%.
Hmm.
Then we step in. So basically, they are making a working capital interest rate without providing working capital.
Yeah.
That's one way to look at it. And I really like that model. I
Hmm.
think it was a tough time for the company,
Hmm.
economic downturn and funding crunch,
Yeah.
etc. But for example, we had Gaston from Nuclear from Argentina on the other day here, and I
Indeed.
know that Nuclear is doing the exact same service offering also for their customers. It's not the main product; it's more of a service feature of what Nuclear, the vast ecosystem
Yeah.
that Nuclear is building anyway. So that sounds to me like surety, providing surety into a business transaction within an emerging market to actually facilitate trust between two parties that have not done business with each other. Um, that's a great opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, the model you described, quite a cool one, I have to say. I think conceptually, so many things align with what we've discussed so often at Fundamental on what we think are the missing pieces in many emerging markets, um, which tend to be very frictionful in doing transactions because so many other pieces of infrastructure or enabling layers we take for granted in mature markets simply don't exist,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? For those who are not familiar with emerging markets, which is why enablers like this, like the model you just described, or surety bonds, and there are various other ways. And this, often we discuss, and this is a very hard concept to relay sometimes to founders or investors who are not familiar with this aspect, or who even think, hey, that this makes no sense. Why would an investor care about stuff? But sometimes you just have to nail it down to something as basic as, hey, how do I solve a reliability deficit? There's a reliability deficit which is missing in an enormous degree in these markets,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
Sometimes it takes the form of an insurance backed product. Sometimes it takes the product of a trusted circle or a club, the way you described it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes the form of, hey, I just decided to build the or eventually take over the entire vertically integrated supply chain, the way, for example, our portfolio company Inframarket does. And
Right.
there's a few iterations, but it's really powerful. It's a different interpretation, and it's also quite fascinating how often these models or these solutions at best have pieces of tech, but it's hard to contextualize them as a tech offering per se, if you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, the tech is not the defensible part. The tech is an enabling part, and it's certainly much, much better than what an incumbent would be able to do. But could an equally talented founder team build the tech? Usually, yes. But at some point, you're just too relevant. At some point, and the other thing is, I mean, that's at least the fact about. I'm pivoting to the second topic here: cross-border
Yeah,
manufacturing and
go for
cross-border
it. Yeah.
manufacturing marketplaces. There can be so much complexity in what you do that the complexity itself is defensible. So
Hmm.
that's something that, for example, I really like about VCs that focus on B2B marketplaces, which for us, it's a very strong focus, but we do other things as well. But it's about one
Yeah.
third, 40% of our portfolio. But VCs that only focus on B2B marketplaces, they instantly get that handling complexity in B2B supply chains is a defensibility in itself. Cross-border manufacturing is such a great example of that. I mean, you led the original seed round in Zwork, now a company valued last at 3.5 billion posts, something like that.
So what is publicly disclosed is 2.7.
Okay, yeah, I'm going
Yeah.
by public sources here.
Yeah.
So that's and fantastic investor roster. Um,
Yeah.
and so what is that company doing? Well, it allows anyone, I guess, but enterprise customers would be beneficial ones as well, to order custom manufacturing in certain metalworks processes,
Hmm.
galvanization, casting, etc. Right? So why is that valuable? Well, if I'm a Western customer, let's say I'm a Western customer, and I need a custom engineered uh, metalworks product for,
Hmm.
just to put a number out there, between 50,000 to 500,000. Where do I go? Do I have a supplier in China? Do I have one in India? Do I have one in Vietnam? And if I
Yeah.
do I want some competition? Can I completely
Yeah.
rely on them? Do they have
Hmm.
capacity? That's very opaque market to vet
Yeah.
and to curate. So that's the cross-border manufacturing theme, is doing the exact same thing. It's injecting trust, transparency, discoverability, matching between undiscovered suppliers of building materials and the, let's say in my case, in the markets that I cover, the Western clients
Hmm.
that in the value chain suffer from my material is not available. If it's available, the lead time is extremely long, can be
Yeah,
months, and prices are shit because Western brands that actually manufacture in the same places
yeah,
put so much markup on it. I mean, we're talking 400% markup plus here,
yeah,
right? So for me, that's an amazing space. We have multiple portfolio companies in that space, and I think let's talk supply chain decoupling and what's going on macro and
yeah.
geopolitically here. I mean, couldn't have better tailwinds. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite fascinating when I talk about. But by the way, what you said, my mind was blown when you were sort of describing this model and all the different pieces coming into it to me. I think a few days ago, when and obviously you ended up explaining it, but just to re-emphasize, the aspect is of selecting a supplier, selecting a geography, matching a price, also matching the time, because you could go further out for a cheaper product, but it'll also, of course, correspondingly take longer to reach the EU, right?
different
So it's
harbor. How
quite
do you get to the harbor? So much complexity.
exactly, exactly. Probably to throw in yet another, maybe there's different customs or duties applying if you take different routes, etc., or the ports of
Yes.
entry and exit, right? Quite a fascinating, very very complex problem, right? I think for the geeks out there, if you want to estimate how many variables are at play, I think this is one of those things which could really get your brain juices flowing in a very meaningful way about the extent of variables at play in this one.
I think one of our
Um,
companies has said
you
that
know,
they use 50 different variables to determine the optimal supplier and supply route. Um, can look it up. I think it was in the area of 50, something like that.
I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's the more I think about it, there's so many different interpretations of that, right? So you're right. The company you described that we have in Europe, they of course deal in the material procurement side. We have other firms exclusively focused on the freight forwarding side. We have some solving the same problem from a payment side, which also, believe it or not, even in the modern age, is a surprisingly complex problem to solve. Uh, by the way, and I think to throw in all of this is the geopolitical situation. I mean, I must admit, and Patrick, I think you may have similar experiences. Even to this day, I think a lot of people um, find it really surprising and like a revelation when I tell them, hey, we need to navigate geopolitical implications vis-a-vis the stability of supply chains and the continuity of it. And a lot of time, I find it comes as news to a lot of people. I mean, is that something that you've experienced as well?
Um, every now and then, I think the um, senior staff in international companies that I deal with completely aware.
Hmm.
Um, Founders in our portfolio that have some part in that supply chain completely aware, but folks that are outside of the material supply chain, maybe more in the software space, and also tends to be younger folks.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do encounter that. I mean, is China really? Is that a problem for us right now? Like, do we decouple? Do we go China plus one? What is that? So yeah,
Yeah.
I do encounter that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very fascinating time, I have to say. I think, I mean, I think even, of course, some of our investments also show that pattern, but I think it's an interesting. I've already used the phrase window of opportunity a few times, so I'll just continue on that same rhythm. I think we
Go
also
go
have a
with
window of opportunity.
perfect storm. It is also nice.
Perfect storm. Okay, let me go with that. I think it's a perfect storm to almost rewrite the stack for cross-border, the way cross-border commerce, transactions, supply chains. I think they're being rewired for a different kind of world, and I find that fascinating in terms of this perfect storm leading us here.
I mean, we've never actually talked about this, so let's do it live right now. What does that imply for a Western brand
Hmm.
that of light building materials, let's say,
Yeah.
that manufacture stuff anyway in emerging markets. And just
Mm-hmm.
for definition, emerging markets in most of the supply chains for Europe are Central Eastern Europe, Turkey, big market. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, the whole, let's say, Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia,
Mm-hmm.
less Africa, less
Mm-hmm.
Middle East. Of course, I mean, there's exceptions there, but just saying less. That's for
Sure.
Europe. And for North America, obviously, Asia, India becoming a very, very important trade partner.
Mm-hmm.
More and more also Latin America. So
Yeah.
for now, let's say you're a European light building materials manufacturer, an OEM. You manufacture
Mm-hmm.
in maybe a combination of Central Eastern Europe, Turkey,
Yeah.
and maybe to throw some Asian contract manufacturing in there. So now
Mm-hmm.
this perfect storm arises.
Yeah.
Tech-enabled companies emerge that can do what you do, maybe on a more asset-light, more platformy way.
Yeah.
What do you think will happen to the manufacturers who might have a brand, established distribution networks? Have you thought about that?
Oh, it's an interesting play, right? I would imagine. So I think it depends very much on the brands, the clientele that these and you, so the brand you described, Patrick, they already have manufacturers in these locations that you said.
Yeah, contract manufacturers.
Hmm. My hunch, I think with most brands, I think, and keep in mind we're talking about brands in the context of building materials, etc., and construction. I think what they tend to operate at is hey, we have manufacturers from so and so country that is usually designated for end users in so and so other destination country. We have
Mm,
manufacturers in this other country; they are designated for consumers in this other country, and it's a um, very analog one-to-one sort of matching, right? Which doesn't take into account too many variables changing, or hopes. I
mm,
guess hopes is the
mm.
right word. Hopes that lots of things are constant, right? The freight rates don't change too much, right? That
Right.
doesn't introduce any turbulence, pun intended, right? Uh, right? And that combination of destination to supplier, there's no geopolitical tension there. My hunch, and this is obviously very anecdotal, I cannot claim to have very detailed knowledge on this, but my hunch with limited sample set is those supply chains are not nimble enough to respond to, hey, you're no, this one-on-one doesn't work. Let's just open up
Mm,
all your supplier base, see where else we can source from, and then still
mm.
can you make it economical and competitive for me? I think most brands and manufacturers are simply not equipped for that situation.
Most supply chains are built for stability, although they should be built for flexibility and fluidity and volatility. I mean, great
Hmm.
logistics people, which I never worked in the space, but I've had people that I respect running logistics, both for the military and as well as for business, keep telling me that
Hmm.
they claim logistics is all about the ability to handle volatility,
Yeah.
and that's how you define how successful you are. So would incumbents build for that or would they build for stability? I imagine the latter because that's a way to squeeze margin out of it and to slap
Yeah.
400% markup on it. You need to procure
Yeah.
cheap and you need to sell
Mhm.
high. Sell high
Yeah.
is distribution and brand. And so that's the other side, right? So you discussed the supply, but let's discuss the distribution side. So the more cheap supply gets introduced into a market that is starved for available building materials, long lead times, um, and then the buildings you build and the inflation you're dealing with introduce the component of, oh, now we need to build cost efficiently again, which 2 3 years
Yeah.
ago was not the case. Everybody wanted to build luxury apartments,
Yeah.
not so much anymore. So now you introduce these variables. I wonder whether the contractors, more the developers, even the wholesalers, become more and more inclined to work with companies that can actually introduce new supply, equally curated, or if not better curated,
Yeah.
better service. That's an element we haven't even talked about. Like, what's the
Yeah.
service around delivering your materials? And
Hmm.
that's something that incumbents will usually not be very good at, because it
Yeah.
introduces, again, another non-default variable, pricing terms. So the
Hmm.
more a tech-enabled company can compete with that in this kind of changing market that we're in, I have a feeling that actually for the first time in 7, 8 decades in the US and Europe, we're looking at not a disruption of the multi-tiered distribution chain. I actually think that will uh, remain, but actually the
Hmm.
disruption of the supply of that. And nobody had
Yeah.
that on their bingo card 3 years ago. Whenever I talk to people, oh yeah, multi-tiered distribution is here to stay. Whoever wants to disintermediate the wholesalers in the West is not going to be successful. I agree, but that's not what's going on. What's going on is that the brands actually need to look out for
Yeah.
themselves, because they might be the ones that get unseated here.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely spot on. I couldn't have said it better myself, to be honest. I mean,
Ah,
again,
thanks.
it pains me to praise you like this, Patrick. But there you go.
And but just to call it out as well, right? I mean, it's we're I don't want to be remain on the record with like a general statement of all. So I was talking about light building materials that actually
Hmm.
get produced today in offshore markets. So it wouldn't
Hmm.
apply to cement the same way. It wouldn't apply to aggregates.
Yeah.
It wouldn't apply to fly ash, just because the value to kilogram or value to ton that you have
Hmm.
limits the distance that you can really economically transport it. It's 250,
Yeah.
500 kilometers, depending on some of those raw materials. That's a different market. I'm talking about finished processed components.
Yeah. 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 I think. I mean, we've obviously backed a few companies solving for this problem statement with a
Yeah.
whole host of different models. I think there's still so much more left to be done. Right? I think we are in I think the perfect storm. We are totally in it, and I think there's more to be built there. So very,
You
very excited for what more is left to be built.
There was actually a company building something like that in the electronics space that we talked
Okay.
to. They had
Hmm.
reached out. They knew of our investments in the cross-border space, and they didn't care that we're obviously focused on the built world, AC, and
Yeah.
construction. Was actually a great talk. I wish it would have been in scope for us to pursue it further. Again,
Hmm.
same theme, just a different
Yeah.
sector, but you
Yeah.
know. So I think
Yeah.
that theme is for real.
I mean, what we've also seen, and you obviously are familiar with this, Patrick. I think what we've seen in the last year or so is, I mean, for example, firms like Inframarket and a few others, they've sort of charted the way for uh, what we call core products, I guess, or bulk products, right? And I think some firms have decided, hey, they'll take up specific slices of that and specialize in cross-border commerce for those categories. I think it'll be interesting to see how a lot of those firms play out, and it's an interesting and diverse section of niches and categories that these firms have begun to cover as well. So I'm looking out for what these companies go out there and achieve.
So you think a founder that is looking to found today could still find certain very large niches to build an equal cross-border manufacturing marketplace? Is everything taken?
So my experience, as limited or as non-vast as it might be, um, leads me to suggest there may be opportunities hidden in plain sight, which
Mm,
perhaps I'm not able to see right now. And I feel there might be others, and a year or two from now, it may seem obvious.
mm,
But today, if you ask me to quickly make a statement on the spot, I would say the trend is more towards picking smaller niches with more specialization, with promise of maybe more concentrated market share, greater profitability, so on and so forth, but not necessarily larger markets. or larger market size, I should say. Um, Although I have a thing, maybe in a year or two, it could lead to some surprises as to how large those opportunities could become, or maybe what they're
So
leading into.
if someone listens to this and you're looking to found in this space, I give you a market I want to back, and you got to figure out how to do it. Lighting. So if you find a way to actually contract manufacture lighting products, ceiling lighting, wall lighting, desk lighting, floor lighting, in these markets, I think you're up for an extremely large market against incumbents that have ridiculous markups for no reason, because these products are not particularly sophisticated to manufacture, just really no reason other than distribution. And you will find a customer base that will take them out of your hands if you deliver quality product with a great service, just in time, the right payment terms. Doesn't have to be amazing payment terms, just the ones that you find in the market. I think you should come talk to us.
It sounds like a very exciting opportunity.
Another
Yeah.
shameless plug.
Hey, that's what we're here to do, man. That's what we're here to do. On the
Nice.
topic, since you brought up shameless, I guess that could be a very nice segue into one of the things
Oh,
we wanted to discuss.
so I'm going into rant mode now. Um, I had two episodes this week, and unfortunately, they're only a perpetuation of what you know has been going on for years. I came across two um, solo GPs, basically partners of VC funds, where they are the only partners. They raised money, etc., and they make random, unsubstantiated claims about companies that either they're invested in and they claim best unit economics I have ever seen, best
Yeah.
cohorts I have ever seen. My God, you need to work with this business. If you're missing it, you're such a fool. That's the implication.
Yeah.
Or companies that they have absolutely no privileged information in. They never took a meeting with the founder. They have no information on the company, let alone they're being invested or whatever. And they make claims like, oh, there's this Chinese company that does e-commerce for fashion, and everybody is saying child labor. And this person seriously went on the record in their blog and their newsletter and said, these claims are completely unsubstantiated. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's the term he uses. Zero
Okay.
insight, completely random claims. And what infuriates you, usually I can tune this out, because the world is full of shitheads and social media amplifies them.
Yeah.
But I get enraged about this, that it's always people that enjoy the privilege of not being called out because they're part of a certain demographic. We can talk about the demographic if you want me to, but let's keep it abstract for now. They're part of a certain demographic that since the day they were born enjoyed the privilege of, oh, whatever that person says, I'm not going to challenge that. Whereas if you're part of a minority, gender, skin tone, whatever, you would not make these random unsubstantiated claims without putting the facts. And that enrages me. And what enrages me is that there's investors who give these people money for sinking it into these random unsubstantiated claims. That one claim about best cohorts, best unit economics ever. 1 year later, the company was bankrupt. So
Yeah.
bankrupt of the
Yeah.
best cohorts and best unit economics ever. Like, by
I
the way,
mean,
that tweet is still up.
I can tell you, so that particular solo GP and the company in question, I still, I mean, the memory is so vivid for me. So when I saw that the tweet or the tweets in question, I was like, is that even possible? Because, and I think for those of you who are smart or who can figure out who the company is, etc., the premise of the company and the statements itself is so outlandish. So for that person to then go out on a limb and make that, you really have to question. was it driven by ulterior motive? And or I should say,
Exactly.
which how many ulterior motives, or how vicious were the ulterior motives, right? I sometimes look at things like this going on, and there's a lot of it going on. I think we haven't even got into the flavor. There's another side to this, Patrick, right? So one aspect is, of course, hyping up companies with egregious sense of positivity and like all sorts of unsubstantiated claims. There's this other side of, because you couldn't get into a company you like or a deal you like or you were given
Sour
access,
grapes.
you just definitely throw shade, right? Sour grapes, exactly, right? That also goes on a lot, right? I mean, I look at these kinds of behaviors. To be honest with you, this is more or less the VC equivalent of scamsters who hype up things like meme stocks, like random NFTs with no value, etc., and so many other things, right? So many other bubbly assets, I guess, which have no value and where there's a ulterior motive to what is going on. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
ingredients. There's ulterior motive. It's a random, unsubstantiated claim. And unfortunately, and I say this, it's to a vast majority the same person that enjoys the same privilege. It's those three ingredients. Of course, there are outliers, but just look at the pattern. It's always the same thing. And again, I mean, usually I can tune this out, but I'm a stickler for accountability. And when you see this and people and then, you know, people comment and like, oh my God, what an amazing company. How can you say it's an amazing company? How can you put that comment out there? You have never talked to the founder. You have it's
Yeah.
I mean, where's the accountability in this world sometimes? I really
Yeah.
wonder. And you know, in our job, it comes after 10 years, luckily.
Yeah. I mean, I think for those of us, those who are listening in and who may be wondering, hey, surely, these statements are being made, but there's skin in the game, right? I'm sure skin in the game makes sure that people have honesty. I mean, I guess without revealing too much, let me just say there's various models, various ways of making money, which have nothing to do with skin in the game, and maybe in
Yeah,
fact
yeah.
completely the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So I would always exercise extreme caution with people who seem to be over enthusiastically pushing companies, or have an agenda against companies without having the ability to substantiate any of it.
That's right. Just do the math, right? So, folks that are not from the VC industry, so the normal model is that you pull 2% management fee on a VC fund per year. Usually, it's a 10-year investment. A 10-year fund lifetime. So it gives you about 20% of the overall fund commitment as management fee over a period of 10 years. And most people commit 2% to their fund. So do that math.
Yeah.
Now, there's a fund that I respect the GP for his, but it's actually GP, I think husband and wife. Actually, I respect both of them for the investments that they have made. Um, Great track record, great reputation, but 2021, money was liquid, great reputation. They got more than 3% management fee on $1 billion fund. Okay, so that's 30 million in management fee every year. How much skin in the game do you need to put into your own fund to compensate for that? The answer is 30 million times 10 years. That,
Yeah.
that's that's what we're talking about here for many funds as skin in the game. So
Yeah.
ulterior motive, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I mean, 30 million.
Absolutely.
I think his team is actually 10 people, which is the exact same. That's the right way to do it. But hey, they pay good salaries, I imagine.
I mean, Patrick, when I heard about, and obviously we'll not go into names, but when you told me about the incident surrounding these two people, and the, I guess, the controversy they're surrounded in right now, my mind was again blown. I have to say, like, as to what was going on over there.
And so
The
that
level
that
to
that's
which,
enablement.
the incentives, um, the people who were backing the fund, and what they wanted to achieve, and how it was completely detached from what was going on. Wow. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's enabling these bad behaviors. That's how then people at some point feel, now I can make any claim and I don't have to substantiate that. Now, let me decouple that. So the team that I've just talked about, they have never made random unsubstantiated claims, but
Yeah.
there are others who have a similar, let's say, enablement around them, getting fat on management fees, performance. Let's see, right? You can very easily get enabled. There's a saying within Fundamental that we say when founders raise, and I think it applies to GPs the exact same way. The saying we say is that money amplifies bad behaviors. It does not amplify your best behaviors or your traits. More money amplifies more of your bad behaviors. That's what happens. So that's why you, as a LP in a GP or a GP in a founder, you have to be really certain that the person is very prudent in how they spend their money and what behaviors you're actually enabling. And so I don't want to enable privileged people making random, unsubstantiated claims on social media with no accountability. That's my message here.
Yeah.
Sorry, rant over.
No, I think it's only like the average person or the average founder or the average angel investor out there, I think, knew the extent to which, I mean, the word that comes to my mind when I hear more on these kinds of things is just depravity, right? If only they knew about the extent of depravity that runs in this ecosystem, I
Yeah,
think we'd probably be in a better position to call out the contrast between like more prudent, better managed, substantiated, data driven firms and investment managers. So
yeah.
I do hope that happens. It might be wishful thinking, but I guess we live in a world where certain things are inevitable.
Oh yeah, I can still dream.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
Shub, looking at the last topic for today here, recapitalization, and then there's a concept called pay to play. So, we're seeing more and more companies that come at the end of runway
yeah,
from maybe fat rounds that they raised in 2021. Maybe they still had too high burn in 2022.
yeah,
And so now coming up for raising again and potentially recapitalizing the firm to get rid of, bad valuations. So where do you
right.
stand on recaps and then specifically pay
Yeah.
to play?
I mean, in my mind, I think there is a whole host of firms. I think at this point, most people who follow venture capital startups, etc., are familiar with the aspect that 2021 in particular was the peak and a very unique peak. Uh, I think there's an enormous number of companies from that cohort
Mm,
for which there is an enormous divide in what the company does and what it should be valued at and what the valuation on paper is, as in the difference is to an absurd degree, so to the point where when you look under the hood and you look at what we would call fundamentals, which doesn't necessarily have to be revenue, just to be clear, it can mean different things for different kinds of businesses, but when you choose to look at the underlying drivers of the business or the underlying success factors of the business, and then you decide, okay, when I see this, against this, what am I comfortable putting a number on if I apply traditional or somewhat optimistic guidelines for the future? There's a whole host of companies for which the divide is orders of magnitude apart. And I'm not using this as a hyperbole. It is literally orders of magnitude, as in it is more than 10 or more than 100 times what the company should be, where you really have no idea why those valuations were paid.
I
Uh,
mean, just look at
yeah,
post IPO track record of what was it, Bird, from 2.8
yeah,
billion at its IPO to now market cap of 25 million. Like that's
yeah,
only the public portion of what you're seeing, but we're
yeah,
seeing exactly that in private
yeah.
transactions in venture right now.
I mean, by the way, that itself is like so deep a cut. I would say compared to some of the examples that I'm thinking of, it still may not be the worst example because at least someone may say, hey, at its peak, Bird had a lot of the scooters and bikes going on,
Mm.
and therefore, sure, for that usage, that penetration, etc., it means something. Okay, fine, right? Again, what I have no idea what those numbers were, but presumably at some point it maybe represented a high valuation. I think there's a whole host of other companies for which there's no visibility to what that penetration or what is the basis on which you are looking into the future.
So
Uh,
now you're coming up for recapitalization in these firms, and are you making your co-investors pay to play? Meaning, we're giving this company a completely new valuation, and if you don't invest again, your shares get wiped out. Like,
yeah.
from a founder perspective, what do you tell your founders when something like that gets discussed?
Oh, that's a very tricky one. So you're asking me what do I? Are you asking me what how I would respond in a situation where a founder comes to me with that proposal, or are you?
Oh,
Uh, or
yeah. Let's
what?
go with that. Yeah, let's go with that.
That would be a tough discussion. I can tell you, tough discussion, right? And I can tell you if and thankfully we don't find ourselves in that position so if I were the person or the investor or the fund who led the immediate round before this discussion, I cannot imagine the extent of embarrassment, right? It would, I mean, so just take into context what I just said. I now have to explain why I valued a company a certain way at a certain number,
Mm.
for which there is absolutely no way to defend that valuation or a tenth of it, maybe a hundredth of it, right? How deep do you go, right? Sometimes, sometimes there's this concept of, oh, buying the dip and so on in the public markets, as some of us may be familiar. And I think in some of these companies, I have no idea. Is 50% a fair cut? Is 90% a fair cut? Is 99% a fair cut? I don't know, right? Um, so I mean, if I were in a situation where I recently led around, I mean, I would be so shell shocked. I really don't know how I would respond to that discussion, and I
Me
have a
neither.
feeling that is probably what this situation is in many of these conversations.
I mean, I'm really not speaking from experience. It's so we ran the math. We had 25 up rounds in 2022, which, by the
Yeah,
way, I mean, unbelievable, literally unbelievable, to the point where someone asked me, "Hey, can you show me all the receipts?" I showed them the receipts. Wow, like mind blown, because
yeah,
at a time when every other fund was basically slashing valuations prior to down rounds already, down rounds happening, no up rounds happening. We have had zero down rounds in the history of fundamentals, 65 portfolio firms and counting, actually 67 as per this morning. Zero down rounds. This year,
I'm
again,
glad.
15 up rounds.
I'm glad you
Yeah,
provided that context because I think also important to mention it's not 25 out of hundreds and hundreds, obviously. Yeah,
yeah. So I can't speak from experience, but I'm dreading the day that it comes. Um, I think my advice to founders in these situations, if I'm not a shareholder, let's say I can be independent, completely objective, and I have no responsibility to our investors to make certain decisions. Let's say I'm completely independent, and it was a founder friend. I would tell that friend, weigh that against letting the company go bust and start over.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
there's
I
a
mean,
price to pay there, especially reputation.
yeah. I wish I could come up with a definitive response. I think I'm dreading what the response to that might be, and
Mm,
therefore not able to come up with a good response, which I think in so many ways is symptomatic of what, from my vantage point, I think is going on in many of these discussions in these companies. It's this
mm.
paralyzed state of not knowing what is more awkward. It's like there's a whole bunch of super awkward possibilities. You just figure out which super awkward possibility you're okay to live with. Um, Yeah.
I'm telling you, the next half year, I mean, it was already quite fun 2022 and first half 23, what was going on in
Yeah.
terms of correction. Next half year there will be a little bit more correction while the new funding cycle already kicked off. I also briefly want to give you the numbers I promised you. So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, found this very interesting correlation the other day. So generative AI, not a new thing, but what's new is that funding exploded. So
Uh-huh.
for the last 7, 8 years, it was a steady diet of between 1 to 2.5 billion annual VC funding into generative AI. This year, year to date, we're almost at 14 billion, 1 4. Take that as a number. Now compare that with it's sort of a random time frame, but I think it will make sense to a lot of people. 2014 is when vertical SaaS, vertical software, took off. What was the number in 2014? Vertical SaaS got about 14 to 15 billion on
Okay.
the whole year. To be fair, generative AI is
Okay.
year to date. So, but we're also in an inflated market and assets. So there's a bit of an
Sure.
inflation correction there. After 7 or 8 years of 1 to 2 billion annual funding into vertical software, and my claim is that the last 9, 10 years were kicked off also in part with vertical software going
Mm-hmm.
okay, that's a pun now, going vertical in
Nice. Well done.
2014. That was unintended. And so generative AI kicked us off for a complete new venture funding cycle while the old one in parallel is still getting corrected. So that's what I find fascinating, is that the new funding cycle actually already kicked off.
Hmm. I think, Patrick, did you also have an observation to share on this total amount of funding? How many companies got a piece of this action?
Of generative AI.
Yeah, as in how many companies got funded
Oh,
and how that
yeah,
took
your
place?
your your mind will be blown. So the average round on the vertical SaaS in 2014, 15 billion funding, was 6.4 million US dollar. It was about 2,000
Oh,
companies that
generative
got
AI will
funded.
totally blow this apart. Yeah.
Generative AI, 140 companies that get to the 14 billion. So you're at roughly 100 million average round.
I don't know what to say. Um,
And all of
yeah.
them by GPUs.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Oh man.
It's There will be so many people getting suckered out of this. What's going on there in especially the European market, I cannot believe it. But hey,
I think yeah, I think at that point we'd be then talking about deep cuts in some of these companies in 2 to 3 years time.
yeah. But hey,
Yeah.
I mean, you can justify everything if you just claim, oh, I'm in the next Facebook, I'm in the next eBay, if someone thinks that long back, or
Yeah.
I'm in the next Snowflake. I mean, I kicked off the new funding cycle and I found the gem. Yeah, but maybe you didn't. Maybe you just invested in the next 100th competitor, and we'll never see, the end of the
Yeah.
tunnel. But hey, I'm glad for the new venture funding cycle to have kicked off. So that's a positive.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Uh, so
Okay.
Shub, yeah, go ahead.
We went quite a bit over time. We went quite a bit over time this time, sir. I think I'm not keeping score, but I think we may have beaten our previous the record we had for our longest episode.
So does this feel like weekend for you talking to me now?
I guess. I mean, I again, as much as I hate to admit it, it was also quite fun.
Yeah, same,
This one. Yeah.
same. I need to program him some rant every Friday now.
Oh, I think there's so many topics we have. I'm quite sure we'll find more that we where we can let you rant, and I'll also join in on some of the ranting.
Practical rants, number 7.
Nice,
Cool.
nice.
Hey, real quick, anything to look forward to in your calendar next week?
So I think there's like a very interesting and diverse selection of opportunities I am looking at. Interestingly enough, all sort of teasing or related to themes I've spoken about in some of our previous episodes. So, one, for example, deals with again like a blue collar workers problem, but tries. So, it's in an emerging market. Tries to
Hmm.
solve it from the point of creating that certification and reliability layer, which also represents an aspirational thing for blue collar workers to aspire to go through this vetting and this education and skilling program, and therefore create like a new pool of supply for qualified blue collar tradespeople. Another set of opportunities, and I have to admit, one thing I like about the company is, as much, I mean, even though it would be very tempting given what they do, they don't use the word AI anywhere in their pitch,
Ah.
right? So they make use of big data and analytics, which is how I think of it from a decade ago, to kind of pass through various contracts, documents, etc., to intelligently manage contracts through the life cycle, right? From sourcing to um, selecting vendors, doing the nitty gritty of comparing vendors, who's on time, who's not, who's compliant with what they agreed they would do as per the contract, and signing off, managing the documents as well. I think it's an interesting problem statement. I think there's a few high quality firms that have been built out with a very horizontal use case in mind, as in applied
Hmm.
in more white collar industries doing that.
Hmm.
I think it's quite. I'm fascinated to see how that use case is built out in construction, given the very project specific nature in construction, given that we have way more representation from subcontractors and vendors compared to many other industries, and the different nature in which projects and other aspects of the company are interrelated. I think it may need a specialized solution.
I mean, we ran like a back of the envelope the other day, just on an average construction project. We're not talking tunnels, airports, highways. Average single family home, small multifamily home, thousands of invoices. And that's just
Yeah,
invoices. That's not contracts. That's not permits for
yeah,
application. That's not timesheets. That's, list goes on.
yeah,
Just invoices. So the amount of paper in this industry is massive. So that's it. That sounds like a really cool space.
yeah. What are you looking forward to next week, Patrick?
Mm, Um, gonna visit a few industry experts next week, and
Okay.
gonna talk about a few trends. This is from the material supply chains and what could happen there in the next year or so. So really looking
Hmm.
forward to that. We discussed materials today, so that's something where
Yeah.
we still see a lot of opportunity. Definitely looking forward to that. And then there's a um, founder team in Europe that is building a really cool ed tech, education tech for reskilling labor into the construction crafts. And they have a
Okay.
quite unique model where they make the employers pay for the education before the
Hmm.
education is finished, and still stay in touch with the um, skilled craftsmen post education, which gives you a lot
Hmm.
of opportunity for recurringness.
Yeah.
Amazing founder. She worked in a very reputed consultancy, and then worked for a large campaign of a European government in a large
Hmm.
economy, where she gained a lot of insight into the policies,
Okay.
but also got to work in her role with the largest employers from the sector. So very
Hmm.
unfair insight. So far, it looks like the company is super well managed, not far away from net profitability at a very young stage. So I'm quite
Okay.
excited to meet that team again.
That sounds very, very interesting. Would love to hear more once you've dug in deeper into the company. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, sir. So I'm guessing you want to enjoy your 30-degree weekend.
I
So
that
that's
sounds
Celsius.
for for a minute there I thought, is this like a wordplay on the acute angle, 30 degrees, the 30 degrees incline, and is that supposed to somehow lead into a weekend? But okay, now that I think about it, 30 degrees Celsius makes way more sense.
Sorry, I'm a business guy, not an engineer. You can't come with like geometry.
Oh man. Oh, dude.
Well, anyway,
Yeah.
sir, enjoy, and I'm looking forward to our chat next week. Hey, who do we have on as a guest next week?
We have Yvonne from Local Globe. For those of you
Nice.
who know, it's a fund we really respect. And we also have a shared co-investment with Yvonne and with Local Globe. Really looking forward to hosting her.
Amazing investor. I think she can tell us a lot.
Really
All
looking
right,
forward
sir.
to it. Yeah.
Well, you enjoy
Hey,
your
this was
weekend,
really
okay?
fun. Yeah, this was really fun. We should do more of just the two of us.
Let's do it. All right,
Yeah.
sir.
Have fun.
Happy
Cheers.
weekend. Ciao.